How do we know what we know about turfgrass science? Welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology. Good morning. Welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology. My name is Travis Shaddix. I hope everybody's doing well today. I can see there's already quite a few people here. Today is going to be a little bit of a different day. Today will be the first day that I've had a guest where I don't go over one of the articles. We're just going to have a conversation about a topic that is completely foreign to me. Today I have Dr. Lee Miller from Purdue. Lee directs research and extension programs focused towards disease control in turf grasses. His current responsibilities include providing disease diagnosis and control recommendations for the lawn, golf, sport, turf, and sod industries in Indiana and the surrounding region. His research activities center on the development of disease management strategies that require fewer inputs and results in sustainable, functional, and aesthetic turfgrass fields. Past and current research projects led by Dr. Miller include fungicide resistance detection in dollar spot populations, fairy ring biology, and prevention with spring fungicide application, spring dead spot management, and cultural control. All of those things I know nothing about, Dr. Miller. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Travis. Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Oh yeah, I appreciate you taking the time. I'm always a little bit nervous when I have a guest who's a professor or whatever, because obviously you're very busy in academia, and I'm like, whether it's a committee or whether it's, a defense or you're reading papers or whatever the case is, going to class, it's like, man, take the time out to do my silly little show. I can understand why, if other things get in the way, you might not be able to show up. So I do appreciate you taking the time. I know everybody's schedule is packed full, and academia is just slammed. My pleasure. Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about diseases today in this episode, particularly disease resistance. And I don't know if there's a person you've met who's less knowledgeable than myself about these issues. I literally know nothing about them. I don't know how diseases affect the plant. I don't know how resistance is created. I don't know the magnitude or the threat of resistance in our societies and our industry. I don't know anything, Lee. So we're going to go through it today, and hopefully you can help educate me and the audience on some basic information that has escaped me up to this point. So,
well, I think that's very self-deprecating. I think I think you know a lot more than you give yourself credit for. And, the concepts aren't extremely arduous by any means. So yeah. Let's see what we can do in the next hour.
Yeah. So I have some questions I'd like to ask. We also have quite a few people on already, and they're asking questions. I appreciate the members that are asking questions. I will do my best, as will Dr. Miller, to address some of these questions. Now, some of the questions that are going in the chat, I'll pop them up on the screen towards the end if we're unable to answer them throughout the show. So to the members and audience that are listening or watching live here, just feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll do everything I can to put it on the screen. But it's hard for me to keep track of everything. Okay. Let's start with the first question that I have. So over the years, pesticide resistance has been a quick assumption only to find out it was an application error or something unrelated to the resistance. Specifically, what is fungicide resistance, and how does someone differentiate between resistance and, say, an application error or an under-application or a skipped line, or, they didn't apply the product actually correct in one way or the other. So let's just start there. What is resistance, and how do we define it?
Fungicide resistance is a stable, heritable change of the pathogen that allows it to overcome the effectiveness of the fungicide.
Yeah.
So really, it's very easy if you put it into two different components. So we have the fungicide component. So the fungicide, most of our newer fungicides are single site of action. What that means is they work on one piece of the fungus metabolism. And in doing so, that makes them safer than we used to spray mercury, even the coppers. A lot of those are multi-sites. But so we go after one part of that fungus metabolism. And what that means is really the fungus only needs one genetic change to overcome that. If you think about kind of the analogy of a key going into a lock, right? So it's pretty easy. If you just change that lock just a little bit, that key's not going to fit. So that's kind of the fungicide components. And And there's also different types of resistance within fungicides. So there's a qualitative, which means I kind of use a light switch analogy. So qualitative resistance is on off. So the fungicide either works or it does not. As quantitative resistance is kind of a degree. It's like a dimmer switch. So that kind of adds a little bit to the complexity. The DMI fungicides, things like propiconazole, they normally gradually lose efficacy over time. Whereas things like the benzimidazoles, thiophenate methyl 3336 is the product name. The QOIs are thought to be this way too, where it's more of an on-off switch. So that level of the fungicide and what you're actually spraying has an effect on how fast you might see resistance develop in a population. Okay. Now there's the pathogen side of this. Okay. So there are certain pathogens that develop resistance quickly. Dollar spot is one. Gray leaf spot is one. I noticed there's a lot of lawn care that's on here. So those are the ones that you would really be concerned with. Whereas tall fescue, for those that manage tall fescue, brown patch has never had a single case of fungicide resistance.
Really?
Over all the years that we have managed brown patch with fungicides, there has not been one case that we have found. And this is on golf courses as well, which have many, many more applications than the common home lawn would have. Never seen brown patch. So there is that pathogen component. The other aspect to think about when we're thinking about the pathogen is it's not just one individual. When we're applying a fungicide, it's very unlike spraying a herbicide or spraying an insecticide, right? Where we can see the one individual weed that we're controlling. You know, we can actually look and, you know, it's harder to find the insects, but we're controlling one individual. When it comes to fungicide resistance, we're controlling thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of cells. And fungicide is actually a misnomer. We actually are only controlling the active growing part of that fungus. The rest of the fungus is still there. So that's why when we go out in a home lawn situation, you notice it's not a one and done, right? So it's not like we can go out, apply a pre-emerge. It's not like we can go out and apply an insecticide one time. When we get it and we're applying fungicides, it's a 14-day window, a 21-day window, it's a 28-day window. So there's multiple applications on a preventative fungicide application schedule that need to be made, as opposed to something where we're controlling a more of a macroorganism than a microorganism. So to get to the second part of this is, how do we determine the difference between a case where I've sprayed a fungicide and it doesn't work, and is this fungicide resistance, which is always the first blame, or is it an application error? So that can be very difficult. It takes a lab assay to determine whether or not you actually have fungicide resistance. So I think that if it's repeated, so if you apply a fungicide over and over again and it's not working, that's something that can be a big clue. You said if it's a skip or if it's in lines, diseases don't occur in straight lines. So that's a good, if you see one straight line of dollar spot, then that straight line is probably not resistant to the fungicide. It's probably a skip. So the other thing I will say that in lawns, there is very little evidence that there has been fungicide resistance that has been, I don't know of a case where we have sampled a home lawn and found a fungicide resistant pathogen.
Really?
And that is because of the one is, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Okay. But one, that means we don't sample home lawns as much as we sample golf courses. Right.
Yeah.
So there's a frequency of application there. And that is that selection pressure that you are putting on that whole pathogen population, where you're controlling the sensitive isolates and you're leaving the resistant isolates behind. Okay. So the more selection pressure that you put on, the more that you're going to select for those resistant strains, they're going to build in the population, and that's how resistance is realized. Everyone thinks, oh, it's just, it's one resistant individual. And in weeds, you can kind of get that because it's macro. Whereas in our case, it is that you are selecting and you are causing more of the resistant strains to predominate in a whole population. And then when they burgeon and they get to a level where they outnumber the sensitive isolates, that's when we start seeing real loss of disease control.
And when you're saying that, it reminds me of evolution by natural selection, where you have basically two driving factors. One is the actual influence of the environment, and the organisms that tend to survive will tend to pass on their genes. And the other one is genetic mutation, which is a fairly rare occurrence. So we're talking about certain organisms within a population continuing to survive after they've been after the fungicide's been applied. That will eventually turn into a resistance in that regard. But is there also genetic mutations that can occur that would result in resistance?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The genetic mutations are already in the population.
Okay.
So it's important to realize that when we apply a fungicide, we are not changing the genetic structure. We're not out spraying mutagens basically that are going to alter the DNA of the fungus. What we're doing is we're selecting for one of those millions of cells that basically have the resistance gene already in it. So by doing that, we're applying a fungicide, and then there's of those thousands, hundreds of thousands of fungal strains, we're selecting for those strains that already have that resistance gene.
Okay. So it is more of the environmental factors, not just a random mutation that would occur. The
random mutation for the most part has already occurred.
Okay.
It's already in the population natively. And we are like very unnatural selection, I guess. We are unnaturally selecting for that resistant strain to predominate.
For a typical homeowner, what is the practical consequences of fungicide resistance, or really more importantly, why should they care about managing it to reduce the risk of resistance?
That's a very good question, and I think it comes down to the number of applications that are being made, and I think that we had a brief discussion before we started about how many fungicide applications are being applied, and sometimes it's way overboard. I released this little poll of lawn care operations, how many of them actually spray fungicides. And actually the proportion was very, very low. Over half of them sprayed no fungicides on their properties at all. And some said somewhere between 10 and 20% of the properties that they actually apply fungicides to.
Yeah, okay.
So I think that, you need to understand what your disease window is. So I have here I do consult with a number of homeowners that are do-it-yourselfers, and some of them start applying fungicides in March and April. So there is no pathogens that are active in March and April, particularly on a tall fescue lawn, which is fairly disease resistant.
Now you're talking about in Indiana, right?
In Indiana.
Yeah, okay.
So if we think about Indiana and spraying something in March, that's way too early for us.
Oh, okay.
So in Florida, March you might start to have some disease activity, right? But not here in Indiana.
Okay.
So I think it's important to understand that, and I think that one of these questions later is going to talk about a preventative fungicide program. Actually, I might change your perception of that a little bit.
Okay.
Because particularly on home lawns, and if it's something like tall fescue, I don't like a preventative program.
Okay.
I like an early curative program. And so getting back to this aspect of fungicide resistance, again, it's all about the number of applications that you make. You do want to try to alternate if you can, but if you're tall fescue, brown patch has never had one case of fungicide resistance.
So there's no
That's out
reason
the
to be
window,
concerned about it. Yeah, we're
right?
not worried about. Yeah, and that's
So the most effective fungicides for that are the strobilurins,
okay.
azoxystrobin in particular, and pyraclostrobin. So
Uh,
both of those together, um, I don't find a need to rotate
hmm,
because there should not be that many applications that are made.
I
You
see.
should be looking at 2, 3, 4 is a lot of applications for brown patch management. And the other aspect is you can get away with, the reason I like this early curative, you can get away with a little bit of damage early.
Hmm,
And these fungicides are the thing that I should point out is that fungicides are really effective, right? So when you apply a fungicide, you actually get curative control because the fungicide actually is inside the plant. Now, if the plant's completely dead, obviously you're not,
hmm,
it's not Jesus or Lazarus. It's not coming back to steal a quote from the late great Dr. Vargas.
hmm,
But if you do have something that's mildly infected, you normally can get that plant to come back.
hmm.
And most of the diseases that we deal with on home lawns are foliar.
Well, and it's
So
funny you say that because it's coincidental you say that because the last paper went over on last Tuesday night, was Dr. Clark and Dr. Murphy's paper they published in the spring about that exact issue where they were talking about, they were comparing it to regularly scheduled applications compared to a threshold application of the
mhm.
fungicide and showing that they can greatly reduce the application amount and frequency of fungicide simply by waiting until a certain threshold is met and then they apply the fungicide. And compared to the regular every 2 weeks or every 14 days or whatever the case was, there were only occasions where that regular calendar schedule happened to be a little bit better. In most cases, it was the other way around, where a little bit of disease popped up, it hit a threshold, they applied it and cured it and moved on. And it seems like that's what you're talking about here now.
That's exactly. I just ran a field day demonstration trial this year, and have done this a number of times. It's particularly for, I would say, for brown patch and dollar spot,
Mm.
those foliar diseases.
Mm-hmm.
With brown patch, we applied preventatively, so that was in late May, which is when we would apply up here in West Lafayette, Indiana,
Mm.
and then we waited until we got disease in June. And then we did a standard program, right? So you're applying 4. When we applied preventatively just that one time in May 22nd, we had more disease,
Mm.
much more disease in mid-July, mid and late July than that one application that we made that was the early curative.
Really?
Okay. Absolutely. And it was night and day. We're talking about the difference between 10% disease in late July and the one that was early curative,
Mm.
and May 22nd before we saw disease,
Yeah.
37%.
Wow. So you think it's a
It
matter of
was, it
maybe
was
the
complete,
preventative was, do you think the preventative was just applied a little at the wrong timing, and now because the curative, the disease is there and is active, it's clearly going to have more of an effect at that point?
I just, for foliar diseases, and I think that's very important that we make that distinction.
Hmm.
For foliar diseases, I think you can be late because you're not, most foliar diseases, particularly when we start seeing the symptoms, are not impacting the crown of the plant yet.
Okay. So let's be clear because
It
I don't know
feels
anything about,
better.
I don't know it. So we're talking foliar diseases. Help me out. Understand which ones are we
Yeah.
talking about?
So foliar diseases would be dollar spot, brown patch. Gray leaf spot is very quick. So gray
Okay.
leaf spot on tall fescue, you can almost say early curative is much more difficult because
Okay.
spores are released. So that's
Okay.
one that you want to be on top of that one if you're in the southeast, and
Hmm.
particularly in August, and you have a stand that you've seen gray leaf spot occur in before.
Hmm.
That's one you want to think about maybe going preventative,
Okay.
or at least making sure that you're monitoring and scouting very well.
Okay.
So those
Okay.
are all of our foliar diseases, and
Okay.
I need to
And those
leave.
are the big ones. I mean, dollar
On
spot
the
and
other
brown
hand,
patch.
we have our soil-borne diseases, and in lawns, we're talking about summer patch on Kentucky bluegrass.
Okay.
So
Okay.
those you need to think about being preventative
Hmm.
because those are occurring, they're hitting the roots, and summer patch will completely kill the plant, right? So by the
Okay.
time you get disease, that plant is completely gone. Now,
Mm-hmm.
fortunately, summer patch is not doesn't occur on much on lawns except for Kentucky bluegrass.
Okay.
And really, you need to wait and have it diagnosed and think about a history on the site before you start really attacking that one preventatively, particularly with fungicides.
Okay. And very, very interesting. I'm learning a lot. So let's move on to the next question. Can the repeated use of azoxystrobin actually lead to worse dollar spot or leaf spot than if no fungicide had ever been used at all?
No, there is no research that indicates that at all.
Okay.
So I will say that azoxystrobin does not control dollar spot.
Okay.
So that is the key portion of it here.
Okay.
I have not seen, so in some cases we can see a little bit more in the untreated when we're applying on golf course putting greens, but it is not attributable. I mean, it's so random that it's basically the same as the untreated check.
Okay. It's interesting you say that, because I asked my wife the same question about oral diseases and antibiotics, and she said the same thing you said. She's like, no, it's not going to make it worse by applying antibiotics. There are other issues that can arise, but it's not going to suddenly be 10x, where if you hadn't applied it at all, it would have been only 1x or whatever the case is. So it's very interesting that you have a similar answer.
There is an interesting concept called hormesis.
Okay.
And it's something that we've looked at somewhat. And when you think of azoxystrobin, actually, if you really raise the level, you can get a little bit of control, but the rate is so high that you would never apply it.
Okay.
And there's a concept where if you apply a sublethal dose over and over again, you can get a proliferation of growth. We don't know in the biological context if that really occurs in nature.
Okay.
But it's kind of the same thing as a rash, right? It's almost like a reaction to it. Now, in the insect world, they find increased fecundity. There actually is a great, and actually in weeds where they apply these sublethal doses, they do see increased reproduction. We don't really have evidence of that being consequential in the field yet.
Okay. All right. So maybe in other areas.
The reason why I really am not a proponent of going lower than what the label rate is.
Okay.
So, if the label rate for, let's just say, an azoxystrobin product is 4 pounds per thousand, right? If it's brand, I don't really like going 1.5 or 2 pounds per thousand, on a shorter interval. I would rather just go ahead and put the dose down that the label says.
Okay. Good answer. I like that. Programs that have been using or rotating azoxystrobin and propiconazole, these are two big products, and obviously in turfgrass, it's just whether it's one disease or the other, using it regularly or that maybe they're rotating it, whatever the case is. Is there any concern there if of developing resistance or reducing its efficacy? And if so, what do you recommend to reduce the risk of resistance, but without reducing the disease occurrence or disease control?
Yeah, it's pretty easy. It's the number of applications, right?
Okay.
So just start counting the number of applications that you have. The reason that you're rotating propiconazole in is to use less of the azoxystrobin, right? The reason that you're rotating the azoxystrobin is to reduce the amount of propiconazole that you're using. Okay. Now, I will say that if you're using propiconazole to try and control brown patch on tall fescue, that is not an effective product.
Okay.
Propiconazole, myclobutanol, thiophanate methyl, I have tested these over and over again. They do not control brown patch on tall fescue.
Okay.
Azoxystrobin, pyraclostrobin, the strobilurin fungicides do.
Oh, well, the one you mentioned they don't control, is that on their label?
It is on their label. However, they don't control the disease on tall fescue as well as so on creeping bentgrass putting greens, they can provide some control of brown patch. But I will say that even though it's on the label, doesn't necessarily mean it's the best tool for the job.
Okay.
So in this case, I've tested preventatively propiconazole, myclobutanol, thiophanate methyl, those DMIs, that benzimidazole, and it does not work very well on brown patch, particularly curative control. Really? So curative control of brown patch on tall fescue, you're going to want to pick up azoxystrobin or pyraclostrobin you're going to want to pick up one of those two. Fluoxystrobin also is pretty good as well, but one of those that are the strobilurins. And I would say that azoxystrobin moves very well through the plant. And that's one of the reasons why it controls so well.
Okay.
Whereas the other fungicides just don't move as well through what is a relatively big plant on lawns, which should be 3.5 to 4 inches.
Okay.
And that's why we get a higher level of control there.
I see. Now, you mentioned this briefly earlier, and I want to just make sure we hit this now, is which turfgrass diseases are currently showing the highest level of resistance? So I believe you mentioned dollar spot would be one that tends to have some resistance occasionally, but is there any particular disease that either sport turf people or lawn care or golf that we need to be particularly sensitive to about developing resistance?
Yeah, so dollar spot is the one that rolls off the tongue. And the reason for that is we think that there's just a lot of we know there's a lot of genetic variability in the population. So within the background population, that pathogen has a huge number of strains. I often call it the Poa annua of the disease world, because it just has so much of that intrinsic genetic variability that there's a higher likelihood that you're going to have those mutations. The other one that I'd be worried about is gray leaf spot on tall fescue. That's one that we know can develop resistance to azoxystrobin, and also potentially the benzimidazoles, so thiophanate methyl. And those are two key fungicides for controlling that disease. The DMIs can control it, but really azoxystrobin and thiophanate methyl for gray leaf spot control on tall fescue are very, very important. Okay. And then last but not least is, anthracnose for golf courses. So annual bluegrass and even some creeping bentgrass putting green varieties. And then last but not least, I should say Pythium. So Pythium blight is one that particularly historically is one of the first fungicide resistance cases that we know of. So resistance to mefenoxam. So that's one that I would kind of keep an eye on. Luckily, we have some new products, Cyazofamid or carbutrazox, Serrata or Segway, that work well for controlling that. But that's one that I would really be concerned about. In a home lawn situation, azoxystrobin provides just enough preventative control that you can get brown patch on tall fescue control and Pythium blight control with one of those strobilurins.
Okay. Now, it seems to me one of the most important priorities when considering controlling a disease or whatever the case is identification of the disease correctly. Is there a resource that you go to? I mean, it's probably in the back of your mind. You do this in your sleep. But for someone like me who knows literally nothing about diseases, what resource would you recommend that I go to help guide me on identification?
Well, the Bible is the compendium of turfgrass diseases, right?
And how do I get that? Is that on Purdue's website?
That is on APS Press.
Okay.
So that is a book that you can get. North Carolina State has a very good one called Turf Files. They have a number of very good high resolution images. I also have a common diseases of cool season lawns that is on the Purdue website. Which
I have, actually.
Do you really? Yeah. That's fairly new.
It's pretty much the only thing that I have that's useful to me in terms of.
Let me see what you got there, because I'm not sure.
Well, this is what I picked up at y'all's field day, and
yes, that's it.
I know. I'll tell you what I like about this, because I don't know if you're the main. Yeah, you're the author. I'll tell you what I like about it. Okay, it's one disease per page. It has a picture of each disease. It has the hosts that disease typically occurs on, the time of year that it typically occurs on, and the control on each individual page. It's just straightforward, very simple. It's almost like disease for dummies, which is, for me, is ideal because I can generally kind of, like a red thread, for example. It's easy to identify. You can kind of get, But some of these, I don't know the difference between large patch and summer patch and brown patch and zoysia patch and all these other things. Like, I don't know how to identify them, if there's any difference at all. So I like this. I mean, you have pink snow mold. I mean, you just have one page, a picture, the control, the host, and so forth. So I just wanted to thank you for making it so simple for someone like me to understand it. But yes, this is what I use. So this is something you might recommend, is I guess what you're saying.
Yes. I guess as the author, it feels, what's the word I'm looking for? A little grandiose and not humble to say that. The other aspect behind that is one of the key components of that publication is making sure that you understand what host you're growing. So tall fescue, I'm worried about brown patch, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at the top of that, you should have tall fescue diseases. You should have a section that is Kentucky bluegrass diseases, and then tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass together, right?
I see, yeah.
So if I'm worried about brown patch on my home lawn, then it is a 95% chance that I am looking at tall fescue.
Okay.
There are some Kentucky bluegrass cultivars that can get brown patch. Baron Brug's HGT is noted for this. But really, if I'm looking at tall fescue, I'm looking at brown patch. If I'm looking at Kentucky bluegrass and it's a foliar disease, there's a good chance that I'm looking at dollar spot, right? So those are the two main culprits of that aspect.
Okay.
So the first thing that I do when I get a sample in is I identify the host. What is the species?
Okay.
Because that's going to kind of segregate and tell me what those two, like what diseases are most likely going to be occurring on those species.
Okay.
So
yeah, so I have a tall fescue lawn, and that I seeded, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. And so for the most part, I mean, I have some red thread pop up, it seems like occasionally, but it just goes away in like a couple of weeks. It doesn't seem like it's not really a big deal to me. But I do get patch every year in the same spot, and that's where it starts from. And this last year, I was the first year I ever remembered to put out some fungicide. I don't put out fungicides just because I forget. I just don't think about it, and I don't particularly care what my lawn looks like. But I finally remembered, and this last year, as you all know, just got hammered with diseases. These diseases around, at least in Lexington, just got destroyed. Mine, green as an emerald, look great. So where I'm going with that is, I've never seen dollar spot on my lawn, and I didn't recognize until I went to y'all's field day that dollar spot just doesn't show up in tall fescue lawns.
I've never. There are some instances, some reports. I've never seen dollar spot on tall fescue.
Okay.
Ever.
I mean, just information like that is so useful to someone like me who just doesn't know,
So, and that being said, if you don't have dollar spot on tall fescue, that means that you don't have a fungicide resistance issue, right? So the one thing that can hit, which is later on, is in August and September, is potential great leaf spot. That's one, but really that removes that from your thinking about. Okay. Now that don't hear what I'm not saying. I don't want folks to go out with a strobilurin every 2 weeks on tall fescue, right? I don't want you to try and encourage resistance development. But at the same time, if you're on a 28-day schedule and your season, even if it's 5 months, right, you should really only be making about 3 or 4 applications. And I am a proponent of, a lot of times I will get homeowners that will send in a sample, and it's mid to late August. And they're like, Dr. Miller, what can I spray? It's mid to late August, and you just said I have brown patch. I'm like, how about you put that money into overseeding? Okay. At this point, you're almost to September. You're almost to that window. Why don't you, a good lawn, what do we think of as the lawn of the neighborhood, the one that gets the sign out, right? It's green and it's dense. What does density come from? The number of plants, right? So why don't we go out and seed lawns in September, along with, if you're going to aerify or you're going to verticut, why don't we seed lawns in September? We're putting the fertility. It's the perfect time to do it, rather than spending that money on fungicide in August. It just doesn't make that much sense to me.
Yeah. Well, I'm with you. I mean, use the resources wisely, considering your environment. I use a pyramid of risk in my world, and I think it happens. It's good for all, and that is light, water, light, and temperature. And that's almost entirely environmental, seasonal change. We can't control light and temperature that much unless you want to pull out a chainsaw and start cutting down trees, which, not saying to do that. But the point is to be aware of the seasonal changes as you're moving into fall. The light and the temperature are going down, and that's going to have an effect on the turf, but also other organisms as well. And so if the risk, and it sounds to me like what you're saying is, what I'm hearing you say is that when the risk for these diseases is going down as a result of the changes in seasons, well, you can apply it, I guess, if you want to, but it's naturally going to be very, very low risk in a week or two anyway. And now your opportunity for overseeding is going to be going up at the same time. So why not, think about it from a more of a holistic perspective, I think, Is
it's the reason why we don't seed in spring, right? Because we have all those nasty pathogens. And we have the marathon that's in our windshield as opposed to our rear view mirror.
Yeah, and
right?
I have neighbors
looking at our rear view mirror.
Yeah, I have a few neighbors that they oversee. They recognize I have turf or whatever, and then so I help them out. And I tell them the same thing. I tell them fall's really the best time, and they say, "Well, I can't do it in the fall." They have some legitimate logistical issue. They can't do it in the fall. I'm like, "Well, I would still wait till next fall, but if you're not going to wait till next fall and you can only do it in the spring, just understand you only got a few weeks before all these risks are going to go straight through the roof." Diseases and even drought and heat and all these other things that are just really stressing these really young baby plants out. So the spring, can you do it? I mean, yeah, but it's definitely not preferred, at least from my perspective. And it sounds like, the disease is a concern or priority as well, and with regards to that timing. So go ahead.
That there are a lot of warm season folks that are feeling like they're getting left out.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat.
there's a lot of warm season that's kind of popping up, and that's kind of the yin and the yang of being a turfgrass person, right? Is when we're thinking about warm season diseases, it's exactly the opposite of the cool season.
Okay.
So it's hard to think about and to talk about things, to a national audience, which you have, right? And to think about, okay, well, here where I'm at now, I'm talking about summer is when everything happens. Whereas when we think about if you're in Florida, if you're in Texas, if you're in Southern California, if you're, on the bottom end of the Southeast, and say I have Bermuda grass or zoysia grass, I'm worried about spring and fall, right?
Yeah.
So it's all about the metabolism of the plant. It's not much different than us. Right. So during the winter, you cram us all together. We get less sunlight. We basically we're warm season plants.
Yeah.
Right. And we get diseases. We get the flu. That's kind of the same way to think about the turf grass, except the difference is we don't have to stand out naked in the environment, the elements the whole time. Right.
Sure.
So when we think about warm season, grasses, we need to think about spring and fall. So spring dead spot, a soil-borne disease, a big one, large patch on zoysia grass. So spring dead spot on Bermuda grass, large patch on zoysia grass, and can also hit Bermuda grass as well. So large patch on Bermuda grass is pretty easy. You can fertilize your way out of it. Large patch on zoysia grass is much more damaging. And I should also say centipede grass and St. Augustine as well. So, like I said, it's really hard to paint with a broad brush.
Yeah.
Talking about diseases, but those are kind of what you're thinking about, and that really gets to this aspect of with spring dead spot, it's a soil-borne disease. It's going to be much more difficult to control, and large patch is a foliar disease. Yeah. Still difficult to control, but it should be somewhat easier.
Yeah, and even warm season guys, I mean, not to demean or diminish the people who have diseases, it's a priority for them if they have warm season grass. Having said that, the resources put into disease management are overwhelmingly on cool season grasses. I mean, they're just, the warm season grasses have your diseases, like you mentioned, and they're important to those people that have them. But the cool season grasses are typically where a lot of the fungicides are sold. So I can understand why most of our conversation has been on cool season grasses. So let's talk a little bit, just real briefly, about FRAC codes. In the old days, we used to talk about rotating chemistries in terms of their group number or whatever the case was. Nowadays, we're talking about FRAC codes. To someone who's just getting into this, perhaps even a homeowner, you mentioned there's not a lot of diseases on home lawn or a lot of resistance on home lawns per se, but for someone who doesn't know, can you talk about what the importance is of understanding what a FRAC code is relative to its resistance or the potential resistance that might occur?
Absolutely. So FRAC codes are the same as those groups. So FRAC codes, most of the fungicides that we have are one of, I should put it, that the active ingredient is one of a group of fungicides that works on one side of the fungal metabolism, right? So the DMI fungicides, so the group 3 fungicides, those impact ergosterol metabolism, right? So ergosterol, we produce cholesterol, the fungus we ingest cholesterol, I should say. The fungus needs to produce ergosterol for growth. So these DMI fungicides, which include propiconazole, triademophon, myclobutanol, prothioconazole. There's a number of them. They're the largest group. Actually, they also include fast-actin tinactin. They also include yeast medication, so miconazole. We also would ingest them if we ever have a cryptococcus infection. We actually would take these medications. They all kind of, a lot of them are in this DMI fungicide group. We can't rotate those. So we can't rotate propiconazole and myclobutanol and triademophon. So the way that we can find that out is on the label, right at the top, it'll say group 3 fungicides. So if you wanted to do a rotation, you couldn't apply Banner, Balaton, Eagle, and Densicor. You couldn't apply those 4 in a row because that is not a rotation. However, you could apply propiconazole, azoxystrobin, fluxapyroxide, right? So you could do Banner, Heritage, and Exemplar, and you could rotate those, and that is a rotation. Okay. So that is a quick way to kind of look at what your fungicide application scheme is, or your schedule, and kind of just go down and go, okay, well, this is a 3, 7, 11. I can do this, and then go back to a 3. Making sure that it's all going after your target pathogen, your target disease.
Okay. Do you have an opinion on, let's say you're doing every 20 days or whatever the case is, or you're just doing it when you see the threshold hit a certain level and you do this FRAC code now, and then the next one you do that FRAC code. Do you have an opinion on that methodology relative, or simply mixing different FRAC codes together in a single application in terms of its relative efficacy and its potential resistance?
That's a good question, and there are a lot of these prepackaged mixtures now. So you look at something like Headway, which is azoxystrobin and propiconazole together. The problem with that is that makes rotation very difficult. Okay. Now, for something like, say you're managing Kentucky bluegrass, you're worried about dollar spot. In some cases, you're worried about leaf spots as well, leaf spot melting out. So that's where something like these prepackaged mixtures actually make some sense, right? Okay. Because you've got azoxystrobin and propiconazole together. What I would think, though, is that between that, I would rotate in, if I could, rotate in something like an Exemplar, something that's like an 11 that would kind of take it out of that. So you would have 3, 7, and then an 11. Okay. That way you could kind of not really, you won't push that DMI resistance of propiconazole. You won't push that SDHI because you're limiting the number of applications that you're making in a year. That being said, on a Kentucky bluegrass lawn, if you're only applying 2 or 3 times a year, depending on where you are in the country, the fungicide resistance aspect shouldn't be that big of an issue. On golf courses, creeping bentgrass is very susceptible. They're mowing to 1/2 an inch on fairways, 1/10 of an inch on greens, or lower. That's where that plant is under such a significant amount of stress that disease activity is not only it's not only just a possibility, it's very likely that when the environmental conditions are there. So that's why they have to be more on a preventative schedule. And like we talked about, I prefer a curative schedule, if at all possible, on home lawns.
Okay, perfect.
If fungicides are going to be used at all.
Yeah, okay, perfect. I think that exact question has been asked like 3 times in the chat already today, so I'll get to those. But let me ask one more question, then we'll go to the questions in the chat and see how many we can knock out before we got to go. Now, a general recommendation that I will provide to turf managers with regards to cultural practices, okay, we're going to switch gears a little bit on cultural practices. When it comes to mowing height, what I'll recommend is, whether it's a putting green or a fairway or a lawn or a sport turf, whatever, I would recommend mowing the grass as high as possible. That would result in the acceptable outcome for you. So if you're on a putting green and greens are rolling what you want to roll at 0.9, or say 90, then leave it at 90. But if it'll roll the same and your members are happy at 110, then move it to 110. In other words, provide the plant as much possibility to absorb sunlight, while simultaneously resulting in the result that your clientele is looking for. So for tall fescue, for example, well, if it looks good at 3 inches and everything's fine, don't lower it to 2 inches, leave it at 3, and so forth. Is there anything like that? Is there any risk about with regards to diseases, I guess potentially resistance, I suppose, but diseases particularly, with growing the grass taller and taller? Is it better to grow the grass as tall as you can to result in a acceptable outcome, or is it better to reduce the height?
It's very easy for me, Travis. I like to eat.
Okay.
So when basically the more that you mow off is the more that you're robbing that plant of its ability to make food for itself. It's very simple. So the other aspect is, when you're going down to 2 inches, I'm more worried about weed occurrence at that point. I'm more worried about sunlight and competition. Yes, if you mow a little bit shorter, and I shouldn't say this out loud, if you mow a little bit shorter, are you going to reduce the relative humidity within that canopy? Probably. Are you going to get more air movement? Probably. However, that doesn't mitigate the fact that you're injuring the plant more. Yeah. Right? Sure. So mow to that 3 inches, mow to that 3.5 inches. If you're a homeowner, the height of your deck is much lower than what those numbers on the side say.
Yeah.
Go out and mow, take a ruler and dunk that thing in.
I agree.
See what you're actually mowing.
Yeah.
Because mine says 4.
Yeah.
I go out there and I mow and I put a ruler in, and darn it if it's not 3.
Yeah, I use a Luba too, and it's set at 3 inches, and I go out there with a ruler, it's at 2. It's not even close.
So the other aspect is frequency is very important.
Okay.
The one thing that we all hate to do, well, I don't hate it as much, but is mowing, right?
Yeah.
So when the grass is actively growing in the spring and the fall, you really should be thinking about it at least once a week, and sometimes twice a week. And I know that sounds crazy, but the reason I don't want to see clippings left on the lawn, right? Okay. So particularly when you have mulching mowers, a lot of times if you don't get that frequency right, then you're going to leave clippings on top of the lawn. Yeah. Clippings are the best shade ever. So we commonly think about tree shade, right? But if you put clippings on top, have you ever left or just cleaned out your mower and haven't done it for a while and taken out the clippings? They're full of mold. Sure. It's a perfect environment for that disease to start going. Okay. It keeps all that leaf wetness. It keeps that humidity. It's all the perfect environment. So I look like a crazy person, and fortunately my neighbors haven't called, to have me ferried off to the loony barn. Okay. But after every time I mow, I not only do the street, right, and blow all the clippings back, but I'll take that blower and walk through the lawn and get those inevitable little piles of clumps and just disperse them.
Hmm.
And I think that's a really good cultural practice that not many folks think of doing.
Interesting. So it is the height of cut, but you're saying the frequency of cut because of its influence on clippings that are left behind, that can actually increase the risk of some diseases. That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought that far down the road. So interesting. Good. I have a whole slew of other questions, but I'll keep you on here for another 3 days, and I can't do that. But with regards to nutrients and irrigation, all sorts of stuff, but we'll have to go down those roads at some future date because I want to get some of these questions in the chat. Some of them have been asked. I'm just going to go down there through the list here, and I'll put them on screen. Some of them we've already answered. At the beginning, Joe says, would really love to know about the best way homeowners to stay on top of disease from a preventive standpoint. Better to rotate. Okay, we just talked about it. Rotating single FRACs each month or tank mixing. We literally just asked that question. So good question,
I think
Joe.
there's a little bit of depends there, right?
Okay.
So I think that if it's tall fescue, I would wait to see the disease first.
Okay.
I do not like a preventative, particularly if you're a homeowner. Now, a lawn care service is going to have a much more difficult time, right? If they're managing 200, 300, 1,000 properties.
Okay.
So that's where I would say, okay, you're going to be, if you know what the site history is, you can be a little bit preventative, but you also can kind of get down on your hands and knees and see these lesions start before you see full-on epidemics.
Let me just pause there. We're going to have to run through these questions super quick, but I have to pause you there, Lee, because I don't know necessarily if we've done our due diligence in academia teaching that exact issue, that method of detection. I mean, like, I am kind of odd, like you mentioned with you blowing off the leaves, and I like to walk through my lawn with no shoes on because I like to feel the grass. I think I can feel the heat and the moisture better with my feet than just walking across with my shoes. In other words, I want to know what's going on. When I was doing a lot of research, I wanted to feel it and know it and get down on my hands and knees and see what it is. And oftentimes with nutrient deficiencies, people say, "How do you recognize that?" I get down on my hands and knees, and you got to look at it. You have to get close to these turf grasses and be intimately connected to what's going on if you really want to understand it. I don't know. It's not nutrient talk. I get that. But what you're talking about is exactly what I've talked about is when we're in lawn care, I get it. You're trying to do 8, 10 lawns a day and you're boom, 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 boom. And you're the owner. You're not on all these lawns. You have people doing lawn. I get it. But when you're trying to diagnose issues or stay on top of issues, sometimes you can't do it from 5, 6 feet up. You kind of got to get down and look at it. You don't necessarily need a loop, but you kind of got to get down on your hands and knees and take a better look at this.
Actually, you do.
Okay, you do need a loop in your case. Fair enough.
And the reason, and I know there's some homeowners on here, and don't get too mad at me for saying this, but one of the reasons you need a loop is, one, you can look at what the lesion is, right? You can actually pick it up and look at it. The other thing is, it's one of my secrets. It makes you look like an expert in front of your client, right? So if you're a lawn care operator and you're on this, you should have a loop in your truck.
Well, real quick, before we go too further, can you explain what a loop is? Some people might not know what a loop is.
It's a jeweler's loop. You can go on Amazon and find them for $3 or $4. I like the metal ones. I don't necessarily like the ones with the lights and all the fancy gizmos.
Okay.
I have 2 of them. I've had them for 15, 20 years. One is Bruce. The other one is Wayne.
Okay.
They, I have them in both of my trucks.
Okay.
I have
perfect.
I have one everywhere.
So get down on your hands and knees.
$4 or $5, it's not that expensive.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about getting down on your hands and knees, this is also a training aspect as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, particularly big lawn care companies, your eyes are going to be those operators, right? So if they are mowing, and then, like I said, if they're blowing off the sidewalks or they're walking through the lawn blowing, you should be able to kind of get an idea that something's wrong by doing that. Yeah. And I think that extra 5 minutes per lawn in the long run will pay off.
Yeah, I agree. All right. We'll burn through these as fast as we can. Here we go. So next question is, rotating propiconazole and oxystrobin monthly with an additional option like chlorothalonil, or is there a better option? Can you discuss the best fungicide options for a homeowner? Well, we kind of discussed that.
Chlorothalonil is not labeled for home lawn use, so I would not be using chlorothalonil on your home lawn.
Okay.
Chlorothalonil is a multi-site, but there are risks associated with chlorothalonil.
Okay. Next question.
I would not be applying a chlorothalonil product
Okay.
On tall fescue, I wouldn't be applying propiconazole.
Okay. Next question. Same member. Can you also talk about DMI fungicides potentially making a leaf spot worse? We kind of touched on that. I mean,
I know of no research that says that DMI fungicides make leaf spots worse.
okay.
DMI fungicide should be controlling the leaf spot.
Okay. Next question. Is there a disease scale similar to the quality scale? 1 being minimum outbreak, 9 being worse, possible turf death. Yeah, so they kind of, go ahead. There's a little bit of that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, there is, and it sucks. I don't like it at all.
But you do measure it like percent.
It's really easy. It's really easy to look at a 5x5 foot plot and go, yeah, I think there's 20% disease there.
Exactly. Yeah. So we do it in that way. Sometimes they measure disease centers and all these other things, but there's not. If you look in the old literature, I'm sure you're familiar that there is like, a scale. Sometimes we'll do that, but you're saying it sucks. I would.
There are some things that you would want to do it. Like if you're looking at one patch, you're going to say what the severity is. And then you're going to say, well, I think this is a 4 on the severity scale, but using it for a whole plot, I don't do it.
Okay. Next question is one question that I was actually had at the end of my list, but he worded it in a little different way. And the question is, now you have to understand, Lee, Dr. Mill, we have some homeowners that will basically do anything legal to have the best possible quality lawn. So for the best possible quality lawn that's imaginable, can we mix every available fungicide group class with the provided rate for each product? Would that result in substantially or meaningful better control while still minimizing resistance? And if so, how often would you want to apply that?
I would rather spend the money on maintaining a very high quality reel mower that's used on golf courses instead.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this particular homeowner, I know.
That's a very sarcastic answer.
No. This homeowner has one. You want to know how this homeowner has one? Because he has my reel mower. Okay.
Oh, does he really?
Yeah, he has my reel mower. He has a 1600 Greensmaster, and he just put in bluegrass in Chicago. So
okay.
And so I agree with you. Well, I think what you're hinting at is injury, which is far more impactful than soils and fertility. In other words, cutting the grass is a tremendously impactful, damaging event.
I was part of that, yes, but I also was being a sarcastic a-hole.
No, it's okay.
Particularly in Chicago, you shouldn't have that many diseases to worry about.
Okay.
The worst ones that you would worry about are soil-borne diseases on Kentucky bluegrass, which is summer patch and necrotic ring spot. If he wants to know somebody to contact up there, to send that in. Dollar spot is one, and again, mixing everyone together is just not a good idea.
Okay. All right. And
because honestly, if you mixed all of them together, we wouldn't know if you would kill your grass.
Okay. Fair enough. So there's risk.
All the interactions between all the products that can potentially go in a tank.
Okay.
And I see that in golf courses a lot.
Okay. So there is a risk.
14 products in one tank.
Oh, wow. So there is very much a real risk in resulting in an unattended harm by mixing everything together, because we just don't know what would happen when we do that.
Absolutely.
Okay, I wouldn't have thought that. That's interesting. Okay,
it might not come out of the sprayer.
Okay, well, fair enough. I don't even know really what he's talking about here. He says, "Is the 150 a valid rule?" What is a 150 rule? Do you know what that is?
Yeah, so that's the 75 and the 75 together. So 75 degrees Fahrenheit, 75 degrees relative humidity. It depends on what disease you're talking about, but that is a really good recipe to have disease on cool season plants. I don't, on home lawns in particular, I don't like that to be your threshold to go out and start spraying fungicides.
Okay. Good. Let's go to the next one. We got to move much quicker here. Let me go to we got Italy on today. We got Sweden on today. We got
I think that spot one that's down there, leaf spot and melting out.
We'll get to it. We'll get to it. M. Fusick says many rotate azoxy and propiconazole 21-28 days all season and have done so for years. At what exact point does this program flip from preventative to actually making dollar spot and leaf spot worse? We actually answered that exact question. So we already answered that exact question already. Mixing those together. is there ever going to be a concern, just constant use of that
that if you're
program?
starting too early, I think that if you're, depending on where your climate is, if you're starting in March and you're applying that 6 to 8 times,
Okay.
yes, you're going to move that population.
And then he says here, can you explain exactly how it works? The movement of the population, movement of the resistance by using those two combined over and over and over and over.
Yeah. So for dollar spot, you would move the propiconazole resistance. For the leaf spot, you would move the azoxystrobin resistance.
Okay.
Because you're still selecting those resistant strains. Remember, most of these fungicides are not killing the pathogen.
Okay.
It's actually a misnomer. So it's a fungostat.
Okay.
So you're still leaving, like, could you imagine if we actually could apply something that would kill every single microbe that was in the soil, or it would be terrible.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So,
yeah. Okay. We also like to know the height of cut to reduce snow mold. Purdue maintenance calendar suggests not to reduce the height of cut, but it's a common theme on Facebook groups that lower height of cut equals lower disease. We talked about that too a little bit.
I don't really ascribe to lowering the height of cut at the end of the year. I just think mowing as long as you can. So for me, if the grass is growing, you should still be mowing. I don't want you to put away your mower a month before the first freeze, or before the first freezes start occurring regularly.
Okay.
That's where I would stand on that. Also, if you have snow mold issues, you probably should not be thinking about tall fescue lawns. So tall fescue is much more susceptible to snow mold than the Kentucky bluegrass.
Okay. Nino says, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for reminding me to do that. I always forget. Mfusic says, in 2025-26, what percentage of leaf spot isolates from Massachusetts and Connecticut or Northeast USA in homeowner lawns are now practically insensitive to both propiconazole and azoxystrobin? I don't know is there even an answer to that? I don't know.
No, and I think that it's important to realize that, we are two quote unquote experts, but we don't know the answer to all these questions.
Yeah.
And to my knowledge, this has never been researched.
Okay. So, and then the next question he asks is, can you put a number on it? I don't think we can. Is it like, he says, using who has their first season using these fungicide, what drop in efficacy is likely for someone on a year 4 or 5 using them? Is he, in other words, he's doing this 4 or 5 years from now, he just moved there. Does he have any concern 4 or 5 years from now and to developing resistance? And if so, can he do something now to lower that risk?
If in Connecticut, Massachusetts, you're applying fungicides 2 or 3 or 4 times a year, then I would say your likelihood of developing resistance is fairly low, particularly if you're rotating those 2 fungicides.
Okay.
So the other aspect, and I think it's important for the folks to understand how fungicide resistance is actually validated. So we have a laboratory screen. So if I don't know many homeowners, if at all, that have actually sent in samples and asked for a fungicide resistance screen. For one, it's not cheap to do. It's really an arduous task to do this. So we really don't understand the fungicide resistance landscape in home lawns very well.
Okay, next question. Okay, this next question is about hydrogen peroxide. Is there any, basically any benefit to hydrogen peroxide relative to fungicide he's using it on a brown patch on zoysia? Are you familiar with that at all?
So large patch on zoysia, I have not used hydrogen peroxide products. The one that comes to mind is Zerotol. Okay. It should be effective immediately. It's a full cleanser. Okay. So you're really reducing a lot of the microbial population. Not a huge fan of using Zerotol for a large patch on zoysia. I don't think that it definitely doesn't get into the plan. I don't think it's the most effective product.
Okay.
Opposed to something like azoxystrobin or propiconazole or something along those lines.
Okay, we did mention that some of those labels have certain diseases on it, but they're not the best for it. And the curly haired dude said, so if the labels don't show efficacy, how do we find the best fungicide for our turfgrass and the disease at hand?
So there is a great publication called The Chemical Control of Turfgrass Diseases. I should have it on my desk.
I think I might have it too.
Yeah. So it's was originally authored by Paul Vincelli at University of Kentucky. Now there is a consortium, including Bruce Clark and Paul Koch, that have re-authored that publication. It comes out every 2 years. There will be, the last one was 2024. It all will have pluses, and basically, or to be on a 1 to 4 scale on efficacy. That we look through all of our fungicide efficacy trials over 25 years, and that goes into that publication.
Okay.
I'm going to be involved in that in 2026. We're actually doing a revision now. It is free. So just type chemical control of turfgrass diseases into Google, and it is a free PDF. Perfect. It is my cheat sheet, and it should be yours as well.
Okay, perfect. Next question, it says he's talking a lot about fescue and brown patch, but I have neither. Could you speak to any differences in Kentucky bluegrass or rye with basic melting out? Anything different to consider, or is it still true?
So perennial rye, I call it the quick and the dead. It comes up in 7 days and dies in 2. So if you have perennial ryegrass, you are going to need to be very vigilant or be on a preventative fungicide application schedule. You need to worry about Prithium blight. You need to worry about gray leaf spot, dollar spot, brown patch. I am not a, can you tell I'm not a perennial ryegrass fan?
I'm not particularly one either, but it does stripe up really nice.
It does stripe up very nice. That's true, but we'll need preventative or the earliest of curative disease control on perennial ryegrass stands.
Okay. Next question for... Do what? I'm sorry?
Just reseed it again. It comes up in every 7 days.
True. Yeah, that's true.
Also, look for gray leaf spot resistant perennial ryegrass. The folks up at Rutgers work their tin can off to get some resistance. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was before.
Would that be on like an NTEP rating or like A-list? Or how would you find that?
And I'm blanking on I think there's a GLS distinction to them, but look for gray leaf spot resistant perennial ryegrasses. There are a number of them out there. There also are some regenerative perennial ryegrasses that have, I don't know if they're not rhizomatous or stoloniferous, but they do perform better. So look for those things. Okay. And all right. My grandfather was a used car salesman. He used to always say it only costs 10% more to go first class. It costs a lot more than that, but you get what you pay for when you buy seed. So
I'm a believer in that.
Investigate the varieties before you put something down. I've
said that I don't know how many times on my channel is genetics matter. This isn't the 1990s where we're floating around with 419, a few cultivars, there's been so much effort put in at the university level as well as the industry level to developing these new varieties of largely cool season grasses, but also warm season grasses from whether it's Texas A&M or Florida or Rutgers or wherever the case is, or Penn State, whatever. They really, really do matter. And if I was going to recommend something who just chronically have an issue to someone who's chronically having problems and throwing all these resources at it, it might be time to hit reset. You've been using a cultivar from the 1980s. It's not the same Cadillac. Okay, it's completely different, and there are substantial savings with starting from scratch and replanting a newer cultivar of those turfs. So I'm with you 100%.
True sustainability is knowledge and putting the right plant in the right place.
Absolutely.
And just a quick analogy, I started high school, I was 4'10" and 75 pounds. I was going to the doctor, I was drinking all these protein shakes, I was doing everything. And finally our doctor said, you just don't get horses from ponies. And both of my parents, my dad's 5'2" and my mom's 5'1", right? I'm 5'6". I am outgrowing the curve.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But think about that in your lawn. You don't get horses from ponies.
Yeah. Well, my grandfather would have a different
And you're in Kentucky, so it works perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but I'm originally from Oklahoma, and my grandfather's from Northwest Arkansas, and he would say it different. He would say you can't make chicken soup out of chicken poop. And, but he would use a different word at the end. So yeah, in other words, you can only ask for so much with what you got until you have to upgrade. Next question, for the Northeast and disease minimalization, does a mix of grass type work? So it's similar to the question we're talking about, mix or a single cultivar. Now, I've asked this question specifically to some seed people that I know who are very good. And generally we'll talk about blending, But what happens if you happen to have one cultivar that happens to rank at the top of the NTEP list on freaking every variable they look at? What would you do? That sort of question always comes up. What do you think?
Yeah, unfortunately, you're not really given a choice. Because of seed shortages and things like that, you're going to get a blend.
Yeah.
What I would say is that to make sure that you're looking at that seed tag and understanding that if I'm, this is the Northeast, so brown patch is still somewhat of an issue if you're going to plant tall fescue. But if you're getting too far north, then you're going to have snow mold issues. Yeah. So I am not against putting tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass together. However, I should say that a 90-10 ratio is actually about 50-50 in the number of seeds.
Okay, yeah.
So, and what nature cares about is the number of seeds.
Okay.
So think just over time as you're evaluating those lawns, if you're going to put tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass out together, just when you're diagnosing disease activity, and there still will be some, understand what you're looking at, because there's a good potential that you're going to be looking at Kentucky bluegrass instead of tall fescue.
Okay. Let's do 3 or 4 more questions. We'll knock it out. So what is the biggest thing that, say, most homeowners or lawn enthusiasts will still get completely wrong about fungicide resistance or diseases that drives turf pathology nuts? Is there anything we're doing that's like, man, why are you guys doing that? Let's knock it off.
Irrigation.
Okay.
In-ground irrigation. That's where I get all of the samples that I get in, for the most part, that have diseases. Are because of in-ground irrigation.
Wait. So you're saying that the in-ground irrigation is, I'm inferring this, what you're saying is they're applying too much water because they have in-ground? Yes. I knew it.
It is not a set it and forget it device.
I knew it. Right? I knew it. It's always the same case, Lee. I don't care. If all knowledge was eradicated off the planet, eventually the science part is all going to come back to the same point eventually. I've talked to you like twice in my entire life, Lee. We don't sit and have these conversations. And yet the same principles hold true. The same scientific principles hold true in nutrition as they do in disease. And I've said this in years in nutrition. Water is the biggest problem, and it's almost always too much water is almost always the problem. And so I just find it fascinating that when I have these conversations with people that I generally don't interact with that much, they have the same position. Continue. I mean, so it's too much water.
So I'm not against in-ground irrigation. I don't want to ruin the whole industry of in-ground irrigation. But I will say that we often talk about irrigation and we talk about deep and infrequent, right? We talk about this aspect of, well, we want to water deep and infrequently because then the roots are going to go down and seek the water. That's not what's going on. The roots need air. Yes. The roots need to respire, right? Yeah. So if you waterlog them constantly, they can't grow, and the plant's not going to be healthy.
Did you hear or listen or watch any of the content I did on water like a month or 2 ago?
I didn't, actually.
You should go back and watch the last episode where I list all the articles that I went over, and there's probably 10 or 12 articles I go over, and deep and infrequent versus light and frequent. And I have at the end I have a table. And for years we talk about deep and infrequent. Yeah, I agree. That's what we're taught in school. But article after article after article was the same thing, and that is light and frequent applications generally were the same as deep and infrequent, or better. They were never really worse. So I'm like, well, why would you do deep and infrequent if the light and frequent applications of water are going to consistently result in better turf grass? And so I was blown away by the finding that I eventually kind of came to the conclusion, and it seems to be the consensus, that light and frequent applications of water within reason are probably going to result in more consistent, better turf grass than these deep and infrequent applications of water. But the one thing I always thought was, well, if we're doing light and frequent, aren't we keeping the grass blades wetter for longer periods of time? And wouldn't that increase the risk of diseases? But we didn't find that. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I guess it really harkens to what is the real meaning of light and frequent. Right?
Oh, yeah, true.
So is light and frequent, is it 3 times a day? Because that would be
that's excessive.
I mean, that's what I do on my plots, right? If I want disease, I irrigate 3 times a day. The other thing we're not talking about is the soil, right? Sure. So, particularly if you're in a new home construction, good luck, because you'll be dealing with subsoils. But that's a whole nother ball of wax. But most of the time when I see issues, it's because a homeowner does not know how to use their irrigation in relation to the weather.
I really appreciate that answer.
Last drought, and I have homeowners with in-ground irrigation that in August will be complaining of drought.
Okay.
Like, yes, because you have kept it soggy the whole time. There's no roots there.
That's probably true.
And you have 2 inches worth of thatch.
That's
right?
probably true.
Of course you're going to have drought issues.
Yeah. All right. What about in the EU, and they can't apply any fungicides at all? What do you recommend? He's joking when he says more K, because this guy knows the influence of K. But is there anything when you can't apply any fungicides? You're in the EU, there's no fungicides. What do you do?
So realize that dollar spot is an indicator for low nitrogen. So you can apply fertilizer that will help. I also would say to try and keep the leaf blade as dry as possible. So frequent mowing, I think, is another aspect. We have a project, it's more along the golf lines, but looking at the impact of autonomous mowing on disease epidemics. So with autonomous mowers, we can mow at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? Mm-hmm. So time when the dew would set. But really those are kind of your targets. Your target is more on the cultural means. There are not any biological, this is a hard thing to say out loud. There are not any biological fungicides that I have found or any of my colleagues have found that work.
Really?
So we're not in tune with nature yet to be able to use nature against itself.
Yeah, well, that's what I've said for ages, is that we barely scratch the skin of the apple of knowledge in some of these places. I mean, oftentimes I understand people may look at us and go, well, these are professors or doctors, they publish. Yeah, all that's true. But don't have any delusions. We don't know a fraction of the total knowledge that there is to gain here. So, we don't have all the answers. We're just trying our best to guide people along the best management practices. And in general,
it's very simple. The way that I operate is, of course, we replicate, but we have untreated control plots.
Sure.
If what I do is not any different than an untreated control plot, I'm not going to recommend it.
There you go. Last question, then I'll shut it down, okay? The disease guide from Kentucky that was mentioned cautions using some DMI on leaf spotting or melting out. Aside from azoxy, is there any other good homeowner option if we stay away from the propiconazole? I'm not sure if I understand the question or not, but...
I do. So what is... I think there's the SDHIs have some activity on leaf spot melting out. The benzimidazole should have some, so thiophanate methyl should have some impact on leaf spot melting out. I would have to look into that a little bit further.
Okay, fair enough. Dr. Miller, I really appreciate it. I've had a drinking from the fire hose sort of experience here, trying to kind of get all this knowledge from diseases and stuff. And I learned some information today that I'll take with me for sure. I hope everybody else did.
It's a great discussion. I appreciate the opportunity, and I think we talked about maybe having another one sometime, and I'd be more than willing to do it.
Oh, great! Yeah, you're welcome anytime. There's things I think that you probably just, it's second nature to you. It's probably similar on my end. I think are second nature to me. I've learned, at least on my end, that, well, not everybody knows that. And yes, people want to know that. And so I'm slowly coming to terms with, oh, wait a second. I'm talking about malic-3, potassium, and oxidation of iron. All this. That's all good. But some people just want to know, like, how to blend a fertilizer or what, the basic stuff. And I sometimes look over that. And so, yes, I'd be more than happy to have you back on and kind of go over some of those basics as well, because clearly this has been well received already live tonight or live this morning. So
I appreciate the audience, and I can't really talk about my knowledge without mentioning that I really appreciate my former mentors. So Dr. Lane Treadway, Lee Burpee, Randy Kane, Bruce Clarks, the Rick Lattins, all of those. I'm just trying to follow in a lot of the people that I respect's footsteps.
Yeah, absolutely. We all stand on the shoulders of giants.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Miller, I appreciate it. I will close out the show. Hang on real tight. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back to you. And for the rest of you, I will see you tomorrow night. Let's see. Yeah, tomorrow night will be open public show at 9 p.m. Thanks. Appreciate you, Dr. Miller. Thank you for your time. All right. See you guys tomorrow. Bye.